Alright everyone, welcome to today's live stream. I'm Alan, and I'm joined today by my co-host Luke. Luke, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good.
Alright, let's get right into it. So, share screen again. Having some technical difficulties with the screen sharing. There we go.
Nice. Okay.
So,
fantastic.
what we have today, I'm going to be showing one game from Oleg Shevelenko, as Oleg Shevelenko was our best ICA performer at the Eastern Chess Congress. He got 4.5 points, which tied him for first place in the under 2100 section. I am now joined by his son, Leon Shevelenko. Leon, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm alright. So, first off, congratulations to your father. Do you know how long he's been playing chess for already?
Yeah,
How long?
like 30 years.
Well, 30 years. At what age did he teach you how to play chess?
7,
7. So how old are you now?
12,
And at what age did you get serious about playing?
like probably 10.
Probably 10. What year was that? Like 2020, 2021?
Yeah,
So you're one of those players that started playing, you got serious during COVID, and then since then, it's been not necessarily meteoric, but it's been a steady upward trend. I've played you a few times. We've had one really good game, one not so good game. But regardless, what's your rating now?
1500.
Excellent. And my final question before we get into the game, is your style of play similar or different to your dad's style? And if so, how?
Probably it's, well, I guess it's different because he's better than me. That's the
But
difference.
like in terms of opening, in terms of attack, like how, like do you try to copy your dad, or you have your own way of playing?
I mean, my dad plays like different openings than me. Like he plays a different version of Sicilian.
All right. Hopefully he doesn't play a6 at move 2. So, let's present the game. For some reason, my computer is going much slower this time than last week, but I think we got that out of the way. We now have the screen. We have Oleg at the Eastern Chess Congress. Let's do this. So, Luke, Leon, you guys have looked at the games, so you'll be helping me out. I have not looked at the game yet. Let's do it. D4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, standard Indian, e4, d6, knight f3, castles. So do you guys want eval on or off?
Yeah, probably leave it off. We
right.
can always turn it on if we need to look at something.
All right. Bishop b2, e5, castles, knight c6. So far, just the opening. Correct me if I'm wrong, but nothing interesting going on yet.
Yeah,
Just
it's
a battle for
theory.
the,
It's still theory.
yeah, just a slight battle for the center. Nothing yet. d5.
No, it's not a battle for the center. White has the center.
Well, of course, white has a center, but there's always going to be counterplay. That's what you expect in the King's Indian. And with d5, even though the c and e pawns, they're not necessarily backwards, they are getting a little bit weak. This bishop I can consider weak. So even though white has technically more space, it's like there's plenty of advantages for black, and I think soon black could get the center. We'll see.
White can literally go b4 and like at some point c5. So white definitely has space. Black will never have more space.
I agree.
All right.
Yeah,
So-
we'll get more on it. I think we'll pause in a move or two. Actually, probably one move. So after knight e7,
Right. So after knight e7, bishop b2.
yeah, and this is, I think, the moment to pause. So,
Right.
yeah, so far, all this is all theory. I mean, the King's Indian is one of the most, theoretical openings there is. Probably in, the top 5 most theoretical, most studied openings in chess. And yeah, Alan, like you were saying, black is going to get some counterplay against white center here, but that counterplay is not necessarily going to be taking place in the center, because after white has pushed d5, now we've locked the center. We don't have any tension, and we're going to have a position that's defined very much by these pawn chains you see in the center of the board. And the plans are going to be determined by these. So you can see black's chain is pointing in this direction. White's is going to be pointing this way. A lot of times white will play the move pawn to f3 to really extend that chain. And the piece play is going to take place in the direction where those arrows are pointing, because that's where each side is having more space. So for black, they're going to try to move this knight off of f6 and start throwing f5 and often f4 and g5 and like this, and try to extend that chain all the way towards white's king. And white's not going to be able to play on that side of the board, because if they touch any pawns by their king, they start, messing around and wasting time. They're just going to get, obliterated on the king side. So what they're going to have to do is try to, do the opposite plan, where they're going to try to play according to their pawn chain with this c5 break. So Leon before was talking about white's going to throw b4, c5, right? Sometimes you'll even see a4, and you get something like this, where all the pawns are running. Both sides are trying to get at the base of the pawn chain. So this will be the base of black's pawn chain. If white ever plays f3, the base of that new longer pawn chain is going to be g2. So if they can undermine that base, either side is going to break through. So this move bishop d2 though is not a novelty, but it's, if you look at the opening database, it's way down the list. This is like, there's probably only like 1,000 games out of like probably over 100,000 in the database here. And I mean, Leon, have you gone over this opening at all, or this is new to you too?
Leon, you're on mute.
Can you not hear us, Leon? Okay, I guess.
Right. While Leon's having technical difficulties, I'll ask you a question, Luke.
Sure.
So instead of bishop d2, which you say is a rarity, what would you play? Would you go with b4 right away, or is there another move that you'd play?
So there are sort of three main theoretical branches from this position. So, the most critical line is this move b4, just directly going for this b4 c5 plan. They call this one the bayonet attack. Vladimir Kramnik was, just crushing people from the white side of this in his heyday. And it gets very sharp. Then the other moves are moving this knight. So there's knight e1, there's knight d2, and the point of that is you're maneuvering the knight to the queen side to help out with this play with c5, and also you're preparing to play f3. You're trying to play f3 for a couple reasons. One is that, well, like I said before, you're strengthening this pawn chain, but also you need to develop this bishop, right? This bishop on c1. So often it's going to go to e3. Problem with this is that you're going to run into f4, f5 and f4, and the bishop's going to have to go back. So by moving the knight and playing f3, you're preparing to bring this bishop here and just tuck it back one square so it occupies this nice diagonal and supports this c5 break eventually. So the sort of interesting point with this bishop d2 move is that it's sort of, acknowledging the fact that this knight is probably going to stay on f3 for the foreseeable future. And the bishop is also going to take a little bit of a unorthodox route to develop, where eventually, if we ever play f3, we might route the bishop back this way. As a final point, a lot of times people see these one-move bishop developing moves where, okay, white is just putting the bishops one square like this, one square like that, and you might look at this and go, like, what is white doing? They have all this space. Why aren't they playing a move like bishop g5, or why not bishop e3? And the answer is that a lot of times when you're developing your bishop, it's not just that you're trying to improve the bishop. A lot of times people want to move a piece and say, oh, I'm developing it. Well, moving a piece and developing it, those are not necessarily the same thing. Here, this bishop move, it's not just improving the bishop, it's also clearing the way for this rook, right? It's also preparing to bring the bishop this way. So the point of this move is not so much that, oh, the bishop is, you're not going to play bishop b4 or bishop a5. That, that's not the big idea here. We're just taking a slightly, untraveled path, where maybe I'm sure Oleg, if he was here, would say maybe he's looked at this. Maybe he was just trying to take his opponent out of their opening book, to get into slightly uncharted waters and try to outplay Black in an opening that they probably know very well.
It's always the point I'd like to hear, especially since, as I mentioned before in the preview, this is the 2100 section. So both players do know the opening pretty well. So, and I forgot what the time control was, but if you do get the opponent out of prep with these moves, then it's gonna, like, the evaluation won't really go topple the scale, but topping the scale will more be in the time. And unfortunately, Leon left the call, so we won't get an insight into the times, but that's clearly what he's trying to go for in that sense. So let's continue with the match. All right. So Black played Bishop Knight D7. White played Rook C1. And Black played F5. As you were saying, Luke, pawn storming, trying to either connect the pawn chain or break this base of the pawn chain, one of the two.
Yeah, and so very often, this F5 move, Black isn't really ever going to take on E4. They're really trying to just avalanche the pawns forward with F4 and G5, like I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
So one of the sort of positional points here is that imagine your bishop was on E3 in this position. F4 is coming with tempo, right? So it's going to be a little bit quicker for Black as compared to this position where the bishop is just a little bit more reserved. And this extra tempo for White is going to allow them to take advantage of the weakening of the E6 square that's left behind after you push F5, right? The F7 pawn was defending the E6 square. So now the knight very often is going to jump into G5 and even E6, where it can be captured, and we'll see some of the positional points in those positions later on. So we could probably continue.
All right, but before we continue, Leon, welcome back.
Oh, yeah, Leon's
Everything's
back.
fixed?
Yeah.
Great.
All right, let's continue. So, Knight G5, Knight F6, Bishop D3, H6, and Knight E6.
Yeah, so this is another, example of these very sort of bizarre or unorthodox positional ideas in the King's Indian. It's such a dynamic opening that sometimes you'll see these slightly eyebrow-raising concepts like Knight E6. How is it possible that White is allowing their knight to be captured and they're going to have doubled pawns? That pawn that's left on E6 is going to seemingly be extremely weak. But
Queen C8 at some point, Queen C8 might attack.
Well, yeah. So Queen C8 looks like it's going to just pick up the pawn outright. But okay, of course, Black here has to take the knight. Otherwise, they're going to lose an exchange. So if you just play through that move there.
Yeah, but before I do so, Luke, you brought up a good point. But I want to ask Leon. So without actually going into the moves, just to let the viewer play it out, after takes, like, honestly, what's the point of having a pawn in such a terrible place?
Well, the idea is it opened up the D5 square for the knight, so the knight could get there, and that's a very good spot for the knight.
Yeah, it's a good spot for the knight, but the pawn, it's basically set up for execution.
But if you go Queen C8 and then Knight D5, if you take the knight, I'll take back with the C pawn, and then the pawn is defended. And if you go Queen takes E6, then I'll go Knight to C7, and then so you won't be able to take it at any points. It's very tough to take that pawn.
All right, good point. Bishop takes, pawn takes, and here White just plays F4. Black plays F4, going with a plan of bringing the pawn chain and weakening the dark squared bishop. White plays F3, Black plays G5, and White plays Bishop E1, B6. So yeah, it seems as if everything that was foreshadowed is pretty much clear. Every single Black pawn is on a dark square. Pretty much every White pawn, with the exception of 2 pawns, even though I foresee that This might not be the case in the future. More pawns might be on light squares. But yeah, a battle of dark squares versus light squares. But it also seems to me as if, correct me if I'm wrong, but white has 2 weak bishops.
I would disagree.
Let's hear it.
So it might look like the bishops are bad for now, but it's just because like literally every single pawn is left on the board, right? So when there's more pawns in the
worse.
what?
Black's bishop is probably worse right now.
Oh yeah,
blocking.
Black's bishop is looking like a tall pawn sitting on g7. But Alan, like you were saying, I disagree that white has 2 bad bishops. It's just for now the position is a little bit closed, right? It's a little bit cramped because there hasn't been any trades of pawns yet. But eventually, once white starts getting their queenside play going with b4 and c5, well, once we play c5, that bishop on d3 is going to come to life. Also, once our f2, or excuse me, our e1 bishop comes to f2, it's going to start to gain some scope on that diagonal. And just one last point on this, the last sequence we saw where, you know, white was playing knight e6 and black took on e6 with their light squared bishop. That light squared bishop is very often the sort of X factor piece that really helps black with their kingside attack. Because if you imagine black's pawns rolling forward with h5, g4, g3, right? If that pawn lands on g3, white is going to be faced with a difficult decision whether to take or play h3. Usually they're going to play h3 to keep the kingside closed. So you're imagining pawn on g3, pawn on h3. The way black will break through that sort of construction there on the kingside is by sacking a bishop on h3 with their bishop on c8. Now that light squared bishop is gone, white can just jam the kingside closed. And if black can't break through white's kingside structure, white's going to have a free hand to blast open the queenside, and they just have so much more space and activity over there that it's going to be, a much better position for white.
All right, Leon. So we just evaluated the 2 white bishops. I want you to evaluate the 2 black knights. If you're in your dad's shoes, do you see them as threats? If not, why?
Well, right now they're not in like pretty good spots. I don't think the
To be fair, neither are the white bishops yet, but we just said that they could be in the future.
Yeah, I know, but the f6 knight doesn't have many good spots in the future. But maybe the e7 knight might be able to go to c6 and e4 in the future. But I think the other knight is just bad. I think the other one is just bad.
All right. So yeah, we play on b4, a5, a3, knight e8, c5, takes, 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 and takes. So Luke, seems as if a closed game. You're right again. This bishop has a future on the queen side. This bishop has a future on the queen side. This knight is terribly placed. This knight can have a future, maybe on d4, but it's still, to me, not as strong now, not as much potential as the 2 white bishops.
Yeah.
Luke, you're on mute.
My bad. Yeah. So I agree, but I think black has kind of gone wrong in the past couple moves where, remember we were saying in the beginning, both sides are sort of supposed to be playing on the opposite sides of the board, where black is trying to break through on the king side, white's trying to break through on the queen side. These games often take sort of the character of a race. And the fact that black is, sort of provoking white with b6 and a5, they're only helping them open up the queen side. So I think what black probably should have done instead of b6 is go c6. And that way you just cut out the d5 square for the knight, and then you'll continue throwing h5, g4, and the knight, like you both of you, I think were saying you want to play like knight c6 and knight d4. Usually the knight doesn't go to d4 because it'll be very easily traded off. Either sometimes you even capture it with the bishop on, you give up your dark sword bishop, but also you could always just play knight e2 if you really want to, and that knight won't live there for a very long time. Yeah, I think black is sort of caught between two minds where they're trying to play on both sides of the board when, sometimes that's a good thing. Here, that's not the case. It's very much an imbalanced game, and black has to play to their strengths rather than trying to compensate for their weaknesses.
Very good point. All right, so I'm gonna
You
fast
said
forward
that
back.
the knight on d4 wouldn't be too good because it can be traded off. But actually, I think it would be able to take the e6 pawn. So you shouldn't probably let it get there.
Potentially, yeah, but just as a plan, typically the knight from e7 goes to g6 and h4. Maybe there are some cases where you could do it the other way, but it's just a little bit, you know, it's going to get sharp if you try to take 3 moves to get the knight to a square where it can potentially be traded off pretty easily.
All right, so it takes 3 moves for this knight to go to e6. 1, 2, 3. Luke, I'm giving you 3 moves in that time. Just make 3 moves. No explanation. What do you do?
Bishop f2.
Bishop f2.
Knight a4 and knight takes c5.
All right. I'm going to erase those arrows while keeping the black ones. Leon, same question for you.
Probably a little hard to go to a4 because he has rook takes a4, so that's probably not possible.
And queen takes it. What?
And then you take the bishop.
I see what you're saying.
So that would be kind of hard to do.
All right, Leon, redeem Luke. 3 moves.
So bishop f2 is still probably good.
All right.
And then when you go, so then, I mean, probably bishop can just take on c5.
And bishop takes c5. All right, that's 2 moves. I need 1 more.
And then like queen d2.
Queen d2. All right, good. This is good training for, so maybe don't get into much time pressure in future games. But we move forward. Bishop f2, rook a5, knight d5, beautifully played square, queen d6, queen d2.
Should we just go over real quick why you can't take twice on d5? I think that's sort of an instructive point there. Is
All right.
Yeah.
So let's say at this point, or rather one knight here.
Yeah, now.
Let's say knight takes right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like you could just grab a pawn, but this just goes to show how if the position opens up when black is not, following their prescribed plan of attacking on the king side, white is always going to come out on top there. So if you take on d5 with the queen, there will be bishop c4.
Bishop c4.
Oh, or you could just win the queen that way. Yeah, sure. But just to illustrate the point, how this diagonal can open up. Bishop c4, and the variation I was looking at is you take on d1 and then e7, and at the very least you're okay. I guess bishop h7 is just much easier, but this tactic is available.
This looks cooler. I agree, Luke. I agree. Yeah. This looks much cooler.
Where if they play, let's say they play king h7 just for fun, we'll take on
f8 knight
equals knight. Yeah. We'll under promote. That could be a little bit fun, and then take on d1. And of course, if they block with the rook, we're not taking it. We'll just take on d1 and leave the pin. Like after e7, rook f7, you just, of course, would take on d1. Probably take with the f rook, just because to get the last rook in the game. But bishop h7, just win the queen. But there's room for style points in a position like this. But of course, that would be a much easier win. But okay.
Right.
Guess we keep moving.
So let's try to keep moving, finish this game up, as one person's waiting on the stage for the second game to start. So queen d2, knight c6, queen c3, knight b4, bishop c4. Seems as if white is getting a big stronghold on the game. Pinned knight, protected knight by the bishop and the pawn, strongly placed knight. Luke, you see any counterplay for black here?
Zero.
Zero.
Yeah, because they're just too slow on the queen side. Notice their past like 5 moves were on the queen side. They're just playing on the wrong side of the board. White is just far stronger there. That's what their whole setup is prepared for.
Yeah. So king h8, escaping any sort of discover ideas. But rook f d1, pretty much getting an open file, more discovered ideas. Knight takes, rook takes, queen b6, and from here it's just complete dominance. Gonna turn the engine on for aesthetics.
Yeah.
e7, rook f7, rook d7, rook f6, and at this point, black resigned. What a good win for Oleg Shevelenko. Leon, final thoughts on this game?
Basically, black should have played on the king side, and he should have tried to mate white.
Should have tried to bait white. I love it.
Good
Luke,
advice.
final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree completely. A lot of times in dynamic positions, as this one was, you have to recognize that, you're not going to beat your opponent at their own plan. You're not going to out-strength their strength because, it's opposing strengths and weaknesses. You have to just play to your own strengths and hope that you're faster. And of course, calculate as well as you can. That'll only improve your chances.
All right, Leon, good stuff. So we're going to take a quick commercial break. Then we have Aryan Kutan from the Glen Crowds waiting in the wing.
For that game.
You want to stay for that game? Excellent. Well, Leon, Luke, I'm going to see you guys in a minute. I'm going to kick you guys off the stage, and I'm going to get on with my commercial break. So, this commercial break, as all commercial breaks are sponsored in the past, present, and future, is by our school, International Chess Academy. So, if you go onto our website, icanj.net, you will see that winter semester registration is open now. So, we have chess classes, we have math classes, and we have tournaments every Saturday. So if I can just share my screen. Here we go. Here's our beautiful website, as I like to say, best in the business. So let's say you want to sign up for a virtual class. You can go to more. You can see the class dates for the winter. Here's our schedule. If you're on site, you can scan this QR code to get to our registration, and you can see how we have class Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday online, beginner, intermediate, and then rated advanced. And if you think you're too good, your rating's too good, there's future master classes and master classes with our two grandmasters, Irina Levitina and Alex Strapunsky. If you have any questions, you can always email us at icanewjersey@gmail.com. So that ends our commercial break. Now just give me a second to readjust my screen. Perfect. So now we're going to get onto the Glen quads. So in this tournament today, we had around 52 players. Once again, Yefim Treger won first place in section 1, with Gaktuk finishing third, Ito losing the duel to Yefim again, Suji getting 1.5, despite a shock loss to Gaktuk. But I want to direct everyone to section 5. Aryan Kutam, who's going to join us now, finished with 2.5 points, getting a draw in the first match before winning his third and a second to get sole possession of the $60.
Hello.
Aryan joins us now. Aryan, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Excellent. So, first question to you, as always. How long have you been playing?
I've been playing seriously for about 9 months.
How long have you been playing not seriously?
Since I was 7 years old.
So what made you go from unseriously and funny to serious and funny?
It was mainly during I was at a party and someone challenged me at chess and I lost. And so I wanted to beat them again. So I started to be serious in chess and I managed to beat them.
Sounds like someone else here I know who started taking chess seriously after his friend told him that he's not good, and that propelled him to go all the way from like a mid-thousand player all the way up to 1800. Hopefully he'll join us on a stream in the future. So let's talk about this tournament. So how long have you been attending the quads?
I've been attending since July, so 3 months.
3 months. It's good because I was directing from August to June, and then just as I left for my break, you joined the quads, and now I'm back sometimes directing, sometimes playing, and you're playing. So we first met, I think, in September, and I asked you to join my live stream after you had a brilliant performance in yesterday's tournament. So before we get into the game, what stood out mostly from the tournament, like overall, like your experience?
I think it was the atmosphere. It was very relaxed. I could see many people having a fun time, and it made me want to go there more and to be part of this experience.
Well, I think you're gonna have a fun time now. We have a 1360, a 1500, a 1900 on the panel. Looking at your game, you're gonna have some fun of a time. So
Yep.
let's see how long you can stand the live stream. So in this game, Orion is playing as white. So we get another d4, but instead of any sort of Indian opening, we get a London. Orion, this opening is bantered by so many people. Why do you love the London?
I like the London because it sets up many. It's not that complicated, but it's very solid, and it can't easily be refuted.
Yeah, it's a very fun opening to play. I love London more not for the opening, but for the city. I've been there 2 summers ago. One of the best places I've ever visited. Glad they have an opening named after it. So yeah,
Yep.
knight f6, e3, e6, knight d2, c5, c3, knight c6. So far everything standard. Knight gf3, queen b6. How you respond? Queen b3, queen takes, a takes. So, good opening, nothing interesting until this point. So I remember playing a game before when I actually traded the queen here, and this pawn took, and it was interesting because white has double pawns, so it seems like a disadvantage, but actually, Orion, why is this an advantage for white?
This is an advantage because of the open rook on the queen side. This provides many different lanes of attack, and you have a lot of space to work with for your rook.
I agree. So, knight h5, bishop g3, bishop b7, bishop d3, castles. So, Luke, Leon, anything you have to say about the opening so far?
It's pretty drosh because the queen's already off the board.
Luke?
You also black
go.
should take the G pawn the G bishop, because then if H takes, then there'll be like 2 rooks in the open file.
I totally agree. Luke?
Yeah, I agree too. It's interesting we could get a sort of position with doubled pawns, which, usually you're taught to understand that these are disadvantages, but white could have 2 sets of doubled pawns where both of them are playing to their strengths because they both open up the A and H files for one of their rooks. So white would be very happy to see this trade on G3 if it ever happens.
Also, this black knight, it's very awkward because it seems as if whoever's playing as black stuck in between 2 minds, whether to take the bishop and let the rook fly, or not take, just beat an awkward square. So it seems as if this move was kind of a waste.
Well, I think there's some logic in leaving the knight there. Like, black can always grab the bishop on G3 if they're ever, sort of poked and they need to move their knight somewhere. And if white wants to spend a tempo playing a move like, I don't know, bishop c7 to save the bishop, then that'll give a tempo back to black. If they really want to play knight back to f6, they can. Or they could even just leave the knight there until further notice. But after black plays knight h5, they're sort of locked into trading this this bishop, which, okay, yes, it opens the h file. We also should maybe not oversell the value of the h file in this position. Like, for example, if you were to take on g3, h takes, and black plays a move like g6, king g7, right? These types of moves. Often you'll see a plan that black can employ in these positions to play against the doubled pawns, where they'll play both h5 and a5, sort of clamping down on those pawn clusters and preventing them from moving. And then the pawns, the doubled pawns might, they might become a little bit weaker than the open files are strong. You might start to lose out on that compensation.
All right.
Yeah, I think in the London system, if you know how to defend against it well, the doubled pawns on the B and G files are definitely going to become a major issue.
It's a fair point. All right, we have a quick comment. I've never seen a double pawn giving an advantage. That is so smart. All right.
Yeah, doubled pawns can lead to some of the most sort of interesting positional concepts, like when you see someone like voluntarily double their structure and they'll have some finer point. Doubled pawns are not always bad. That's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, but on the flip side, I want to tell the user, be careful. Don't just get double pawns for the sake of getting an unbalanced, crazy position, because they can be sometimes advantage, but in most cases, they aren't good. All right, so we move c4, c takes, d4, e takes d4, knight b4, bishop b1, knight takes g3, h takes g3, bishop b7.
Yeah.
So a little bit, I'd say a frantic exchange. Bishop b1, Leon, I'm not a big fan of, but seems as if that's the only way around. And then black does exactly what we said not to, opening up this rook. So now there's a bishop pointing at h7, a rook pointing at h7, and after bishop d7, seems as if black's in big trouble.
Can I give you a little backstory about the move bishop d7? So obviously I didn't want my opponent to see that the h7 pawn was under attack. So I looked at the queen side and stared at it intensely, and then he noticed me looking at it. So he thought I was planning to attack on the queen side. So I guess he played bishop d7 to make sure his knight's not getting kicked out anytime soon by rook a4. But
It seems as if he completely missed. Bishop takes h7, king h8, and now rook h2. I don't know. I'm looking at this position, Luke, and I'm thinking maybe king e2.
That looks good. Yep. Yeah, just instead of bishop d7, just to highlight this, I think there's a plan here that sort of might address that last commenter's ideas about doubled pawns. Is so just a couple moves back, you don't have to go all the way back, but this move c4, I think, is a little bit of a positional concession to black, because for a couple reasons. One is you give up this b4 square, right? Where often when you have the doubled pawns, the strength of them is that you can sort of air out the structure. You can, for example, the move b4 is should be on white's agenda. Like take c takes on, or d takes on c5 and play b4. You'll gain the b3 square for your knight, right? You gain some nice dark squares. But after you go c4, and it becomes a lot harder to push those two doubled pawns on b3 and b2. Once the pawns get cramped like that, the doubled pawns, they get sort of smushed together and they can't move. That's when they sort of start to become weaknesses, is when they get sort of rigid and frozen. So after this whole sequence with knight b4, the bishop's on b1, and then finally black takes on g3. After h takes g3, so if you go back just a little bit, right after h takes g3. Yeah, right here. Here, I think if black plays the move g6, they'll play king g7, and then you'll notice they have a very similar plan to what they're doing on the queen side, where they'll play pawn to h5 and clamp down on those 2 pawns on g3 and g2 in the same way that they're doing with b3 and b2. They just want to keep those pawns from moving, because the second they start, playing f3 and g4, and maybe even bring like the king to g3, they sort of use those doubled pawns as sort of a barbed wire fence to keep out their opponent's pieces and get some play on the h file. But by closing them down, it makes it a lot harder for white to do that. So it's important to keep in mind, doubled pawns, if they're fluid and they can sort of be a dynamic asset, you can push them at will. Usually that can lead to some dynamic play. But once they get cramped down, they sort of become stale and weak. Okay, but white put the bishop on b1. It's so far away from h7 that I guess it's easy to forget that it's even there.
Yeah. So it takes king h8, rook h2, not bad.
Rook h2 is kind of passive. Because
I mean, yeah.
you should probably try to go king e2 and then kind of, like you said earlier, and maybe like connect the rooks.
Yeah. So think about rook h2. It is passive. It's not the worst move, but king e2, it connects the rook Sarion right away.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm also thinking, what if instead of king e2 or rook h2, what about queenside?
I didn't really have a plan on the queen side since I already had
Like I'm saying, if you queenside castle, like it could be a little
Oh,
risky.
queenside castle? I mean,
Could be a little risky, but it's also a surefire way of connecting the rooks.
Yeah.
Disadvantage is this rook is no longer on the queen side, so that's a negative of queenside castling. But then also you won't have to worry about anything on c2.
yeah.
I actually like king e2 because once we're in this sort of queenless middle game, your king's not in any danger in the center. So by playing king e2, you sort of patch up some of the light squares that knight on b4 is looking at, like c2 and d3. And also it's just a little more flexible. You leave that rook on a1, and it's not like the rook is any better on d1 than it is on a1. So actually I would argue the rook is probably better on a1 than it is on d1 after you queenside castle. So king e2, I think, gets the best of both worlds. You're using your king as a strong endgame piece, and you keep that rook on a1 active on the a file, and it can always swing over to h1 after you try to double rooks on the h file. So,
yeah, king e2 is a little bit more flexible. It's probably just generally better.
But rook h2, I don't think there's anything really. I mean, I see the idea, right? You want to double up. That makes some sense. I don't think there's anything really too wrong with it.
Yeah. So g5, which I don't really see much of what it does other than giving an escape square.
Yeah.
Weakens this bishop.
It's making the king run away, so that way there's no more powerful discovered checks. Yeah. Even though there's none anyway.
You found a good response in knight e5. Bishop goes to e8. And here you play king e2. Perfect timing. King g7. Bishop goes.
I think you shouldn't bring your bishop all the way back there because I think you need your rook to double. I think you should.
Absolutely.
If you want to bring it back, I think it's okay to bring it to d3 and get it exchanged for black's knight, and then you'll be able to double on the h file, and I think that would be a little bit better because now your a rook is kind of shut down from the idea of going to the h file for a little while.
Yeah, Arian, help me out because I don't understand this move at all.
My thought process was, okay, now since the king has left the h file where it's not going to be threatened by the rook, I was thinking like rook h8, and then my bishop.
You need two rooks for that, no?
Rook h8.
You mean for black, right?
Yeah,
Black's
for black.
Like,
That's what I was worried about. And then My bishop's not looking too hot.
It's looking not only is it not looking too hot on d1, completely blocking off the rook. When you want the rook to swing across to h1 and support your other rook.
And if you're afraid of rook h8, then if you go rook ah1 and then he goes rook h8, the bishop is defended. There's no problem. And your bishop can always go back to b1 after that. And your rook has escaped the a file and it's now working on the h file.
So yeah, a massive step back, but let's see what happens next. So Gogtug agrees. Why not go rook h1 before bishop e1? But I think we're already exhausted that point. No need to talk about it. We move. f6, rook h7 check, king g8. So thing is now, this is a great move, taking the bishop, but f6 was terrible. But let's say this wasn't played. That's another thing. If you go rook h7 now, just to get it in, then it's difficult to leave the rook there, leave the bishop here, and have this rook just as a prisoner in its own half.
Yeah, I agree. In hindsight, that's bishop b1 is definitely not the best move, and even the rook h7 idea is also.
Regardless, if bishop e1 was not good, f6 was terrible, because now check, takes, and now even though it was a trade, it's not really a trade because this rook is now just dominant, and this rook is not so badly placed anymore. So
the rook could probably also come on a5, maybe, to try to come around. Like if those central pawns are removed, it might be able to come on a5 and then remaneuver and like come to g5 and help the attack.
Yeah, so there's this rook, and now this knight all of a sudden is looking powerful after going to f3, forking these two pawns, getting itself in the center. So if we're saying that bishop e1 is a mistake, this move is terrible. Just putting weaknesses all around the board. We continue, so takes, bishop h7, king h8, rook h1, beautiful Orion, bishop c6, bishop g6 check, king g8, rook h7, beautiful, rook f d8, rook e g7 check, king f8, rook f7, king g8, a little repeat, but it's alright. If you don't want to think while thinking, you can think on your toes and eventually find the right plan. Getting the knight in, pawn takes, knight takes g5, and from here, it's not really much of a contest. There's too many pieces, and in the end, it's a checkmate.
Can you go back a couple of moves, like right when he went rook to g7?
Rook g7?
Yeah, rook g7 check when he went there. After king f8, I think there might be, I think there might be a faster way to mate here. It just feels like kind of close to mate.
Well,
like
obviously there's something faster than just repeating.
Rook c7 maybe.
All right, so here rook c7.
No, after you go rook to g7 check, maybe you can try rook c7.
They'll play king g8. And I think it's sort of the same thing, right?
All right.
I think you need the knight.
Let's see what this engine says. Yeah, it appears as if top moves are check with this rook, move the knight. So, yeah.
Computer always wants to repeat once.
Yeah. In the end, every line goes with bringing the knight. But what I want to ask you, Luke, where did black go wrong? Was it f6 or was it
just hanging
before?
h7? Once you hang h7, it's basically over. At the very least, I mean, you're hanging an entire pawn, and it's even worse than that because then white is going to attack on the h-file the entire game. So I think that plan I was highlighting earlier with after he takes on g3, h takes g3, and you play pawn to g6, you just slowly expand on both sides of the board for black. I think black would have had a great game, But yeah, once you hang the pawn right next to your king, and your king is going to get attacked for the rest of the game, you sort of just have to sit and grovel and hope your opponent doesn't break through. But Arian did very well. So,
Arian, at what point did you begin to relax?
I think it was probably after I doubled my rooks. Or sorry, no, sorry. I got both rooks on the
H files?
seventh rank.
Oh, seventh rank.
Yeah, and then I saw the attack was just too overwhelming, and I knew that there was gonna be mate in a couple of moves. So.
All right, Leon. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I think after Black blundered h7, it was kind of hard to defend after that. So, yeah, probably they had to go g6, like Luke said.
All right. Thank you so much to everyone that came to watch our stream. Thank you so much to everybody. Thanks so much to all our guests, Arian, Leon, Luke. Thank you so much. And Luke especially. Hope to see you guys next week. I'm Alan, and I'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much.
bye-bye.
Bye.